Happy Monday to everybody out there. My name's Jason Priester, Clemson Insider. Appreciate everybody that is tuned in this evening on this glorious Monday. I don't know about you guys. It looks like it's fixing to rain at my house. Good thing I got the grass cut yesterday. Busy week for Clemson this week, man. A lot of different ways we could go tonight. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors over at A-Glass. For when you need a glass, check out A-Glass. They'll take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement, repair, 2 locations in the PD, 1 in Florence, 1 in Sumter. Get yourself a free quote today, myaglass.com. Baseball team rebounds in a big way. I mean, a big way. You got yourself a new addition to the 2026 class, and a big one, in my opinion, and for a multitude of reasons. I was over there in Spartanburg Friday for Contavion Anderson's announcement. That's a big recruiting win over, if for no other reason, just because you beat out South Carolina. There's for the past couple of years, there's this narrative out there that they've kind of owned the state, beat Clemson out on particularly some offensive linemen who probably, now that we're a couple of years removed from that thing, probably ended up being a good thing you missed on at least most of those guys. One of them's already transferred after 1 season at South Carolina. I mean, but it's a statement recruiting victory in this state anyways, because that is a guy both programs wanted. One of the probably 10 best safeties in the class. It gives you a lot of length, a lot of athleticism, and a lot of speed on the back end of that defense. I think he's a guy that's going to fit in well in Tom Allen's scheme. Can probably use him in a couple of different ways. You could probably plug him into a couple of different spots. He doesn't shy away from contact. Haven't got to watch him live in person yet. I'm going to try to do that this year since he's right there in Spartanburg. But, his film's impressive. It's a pretty big get. You can now turn your attention to the big official visit weekend that's coming up here at the end of the month. You can scratch one name off the list, add another one. So Darian Morgan will not be visiting Clemson that weekend. But Devin Fitzgerald will. So you take one wide receiver off, replace him with another one. Morgan's a guy you were never probably realistically going to land anyways. Obviously you'd rather have a shot than no shot, but he's probably staying in the state, and that's one of those that's probably heading in a direction that Clemson's not going to win regardless of where he ends up. A lot to like about the Fitzgerald kid. I haven't really dug deep into a lot of his film yet. Watched a little bit of it over the weekend, but certainly has the bloodlines. He's the son of Larry Fitzgerald, NFL legacy. Probably one of the best to ever do it. He's a 3-star guy. Craig Dandridge is another wide receiver that'll be there this weekend. Still think Clemson looks to take one more there. You don't make the cut for defensive end Luke Waffle, who announced his finalist Friday. Don't make the cut for offensive lineman Zayden Crimpin, who announced his finalist Friday. Don't think it's really that big a deal with Crimpin. You've got a bunch of offensive linemen already committed in the class 4, probably going to add at least one more, maybe even 2. Still got several quality guys visiting here in a couple of weeks. I do think defensive end's kind of that position of concern right now. I probably would have been better off kind of doing what they did at offensive line, at least to a degree, and widening the net a little bit, creating a little bit bigger of a pool for yourself. When you come into the beginning of the year and you're really focused on 2 guys, you're not giving yourself a whole lot of room for or margin for error there. And that's kind of where we were with Clemson in January. Cam Brooks and Dre Quinn. Brooks is already off the board, committed to Cal. Quinn's turned into one of these. Yeah, I mean, he's got a bunch of big programs coming after him: Texas, Georgia, Clemson. I mean, Notre Dame, you name it. But Quinn will be visiting here that weekend. Hence the board expanding. You know, J.R. Hardrick picks up an offer a couple weeks ago. Talked to him on the phone for a little bit, a night or two after the offer, and he told me that night that he planned on being at the big official visit weekend, but it wasn't officially locked in. He still had to move some things around because he was scheduled to go to Louisville that weekend, if I'm remembering right. He announces over the weekend, though, that he's definitely coming, which I always expected he would be, because I remember him telling me, it's a invite from Clemson. That's something you can't pass up. We'll see what happens with him over the next few weeks. Do think Clemson's in a pretty good spot with him at this point. I did learn something interesting over the weekend, though. Excuse me. The newest offensive line offer, Fletcher Turk, he cannot visit for the official visit weekend. He wouldn't really get into specifics why. He's got another one scheduled for that weekend. I don't know if he just didn't want to change it or what. So Clemson's going to let him come in and do an official in the middle of the month. I think that's pretty interesting because Dabo usually only does officials that one weekend during the month. So that they're kind of making an exception for him. We'll see if they make an exception for anybody else. I've kind of heard rumors that they would. But I find that extremely interesting. And since Clemson offered the Turk kid, you've had Georgia jump in with an offer, and he's from Georgia, and Florida jump in with the offer. That was since I talked to him. When I talked to him, he told me Clemson and Georgia Tech were both at the top of his list. That was the other school he's got an official visit schedule with, and actually called. I know he was talking about from an academic standpoint, but at least in my experience, I don't hear kids say this a lot. He said, JR, Georgia Tech's actually the better school. But he had a lot of good things to say about both programs, but it sounds like it's kind of neck and neck there with him, with Clemson and Georgia Tech for him. Baseball team rebounds this weekend. I don't care if it was against Pitt. I don't care where they are in the standings. This team needed to come out of its shell and start hitting the ball some, and that's what they did. I've seen them face pitchers on the same level as this weekend over the past 3 weeks. Not as good as some they seen, or some that they saw over the past weekend, and fare worse. I mean, I wanted to see the bats come alive. We kind of been waiting on it for 3 weeks, and they finally did. I don't care who the pitchers were. Don't care who the opponent was. It's a good sign, particularly going in to the ACC tournament. You don't want to go limping into that thing. I am of the opinion that Clemson's going to host now. Don't care what happens in the tournament. I think they've got a little bit of help down the stretch with North Carolina State kind of tanking. I think the ACC is going to give 4 host teams, and there's no way you cannot give Clemson one. You can't let Georgia Tech host, seeing as they got a lower RPI. Clemson took 2 out of 3 from them, and I let Clemson host. The RPI is up to 10 at the moment. D1's projecting them to be a host again. I don't think it really matters what happens on Wednesday. But you certainly would like to win that game and take it out of the committee's hands and lock it up for sure, because if you win that game, then there's no doubt about it. I think that if you go and make a run, and I don't know that they've got the pitching to do it, but if you can make a run to Sunday, win or lose, I think you're back in the top 8 discussion. But some of that would also depend on what happens around you. I mean, the team actually hit 340 or over 340 for the weekend. They had like 45 base hits, I think, averaged 10 runs a game. Jack Crichton and Cam Cantarella absolutely killed it. I mean, Jack Crichton got screwed out of not being ACC Player of the Week this week. He just he absolutely killed it. I can't remember what his numbers were. I think he got put out 4 times all weekend. He had 3 doubles and a triple on Sunday. And had a couple of steals over the weekend, scored a bunch of runs. I mean, he's just seeing the ball really well right now. And Cantarella's finally kind of coming into or rounding into form here down the stretch. He's got that average back up over to 320 now after the dip below 300 a couple of weeks ago. So I think they're in a pretty good spot. Not sure who you'd rather face between Stanford or Virginia Tech. I'm not sure it really matters all that much. They're kind of right there together from a quality standpoint. You did already take 2 out of 3 from Stanford this week. I think the bigger question is, who do you pitch Wednesday? Do you roll Kanak out there and try to get a win, or do you save the Kanak for Thursday and maybe roll BJ Bailey out there on Wednesday? Because I don't think you have a lot of options from a starting pitching standpoint anyways. You burned Bell on Saturday, burned Titsworth on Friday. That would be Sunday, Monday. That would only be 3 days rest if you went with Titsworth. I think, you'd have to go with a guy like Bailey if you don't go with Kanak, because he only pitched the inning on Sunday. Wasn't a very good inning, but he should be fresh. And with them having played Thursday, Friday, Saturday this week, you don't really take Kanak off schedule too badly. And with regional starting next Thursday, you'd kind of keep him right on that schedule without messing it up too bad. But I think it'll be interesting to see who they run out there to start it off Wednesday. I don't know that there is a wrong answer. If it was me, I'd probably try to get by with Bailey in the first one, being as it is a single elimination type deal. I could easily see them running Kanak out there. Would I say Clemson is leading for Hardrick? Yeah, I probably would. We'll see what happens here over the next few weeks, but having talked to him a little bit, and most of the time these guys aren't going to tip their hand or anything like that, but sometimes you can tell by the tone in their voice and stuff when they talk about one school as opposed to another, or this coach or that coach, and he tends to kind of be a little more energetic when you're asking him about Clemson or Chris Rump or something. Rump's already been there at least twice during this current evaluation period, contact period, whatever you want to call it. So they're on him hard. I've actually not even really watched any of his film yet, so I can't really comment on any of that. But that's a guy you need to hit on, man. You just, with the small number of defensive ends that you've really targeted in this class, you've not really gained a whole lot of traction with many of them. I thought they were in it for Cam Brooks, who eventually committed to Cal. They're in it for Dre Quinn, but I don't know that they've ever been the leader. I don't know that they were ever the leader for Brooks. Hard to get a good read on Quinn. I could easily see him end up being a part of this class, but his recruitment is one of those that's, or at least for me, that's kind of hard to get a good gauge on. But yeah, I think they're in a pretty good spot for Hardrick. I think he's a guy that you need to land. What happened to the other white guy you used to talk football with? I don't know. You're gonna have to give me a name. I'm not sure who we talking about there. Trying to remember. I've done some stuff. And I've done some stuff with Mark Rogers in the past. Most of that's during the season, though. We don't really do a whole lot during the summer and stuff. I hadn't really heard from him in a while, but I usually jump on when he wants me to. I assume that's who you're talking about, but because I can't really think of anybody else I've done a whole lot with football wise. But if that's who we're talking about, that most of that's usually during the season or right after or right before or during spring practice. How many defensive ends wanted this cycle? 2 men. I would say 2. And you can always, the portal's always there if you think you need to go get one out of the portal, which might be something they need to consider doing after this year, regardless. A lot of that might depend on where a guy like Darian Mayo is or Watford is a year from now. But I could easily see them having to go get themselves another pass rusher for next year, seeing as TJ Parker is expected to head off to the NFL. Yeah, I would say 2. Since they were up in Pitt, I've not really talked to anybody. I don't really have any updates on any pictures at this point. I think me and Ashby's going to try to do the baseball show tomorrow night. That's not set in stone quite yet, but I think that's what we're aiming to do before they play in Durham, and hopefully we have a little bit more by then. The whole polo thing is going to be fun. I'll be honest with you, man. When Dabo called in and he said, and the first thing he said was, is this polo? I can't remember how he said it, but said something about polo. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, he's called the kid by the wrong name. And then when he said it the second time, I realized what he was doing. Yeah, that was pretty cool, man. I don't know how many noticed, but one of them turned the phone around and it's got, I don't know if you can see it on any of the videos or anything, but it's got Dabo's phone number plastered right up there. That was funny. But yeah, he's a guy that doesn't do very many interviews. I had never done an interview with him before Friday. That was a big part of why I went up there, because I wanted to get a chance to be around him a little bit, talk to him, get to know him a little bit. But, other than texting back and forth when he was telling me when he'd visit and stuff, I had not really had a lot of discussion with him. He just doesn't do a lot of media stuff. I actually said, I told him after he announced Friday, I said, I know you hate doing the media stuff. And he's like, yeah. But I think I got to talk to him. I talked to his head coach. I talked to his mom. Man, he's gonna be a really good addition to the program. And he's a guy that, he grew up rooting for Clemson, man. He's there from the upstate. He's one of those guys you don't have to worry about jumping into portal, after a semester or 2 semesters, because he's hit a little bit of adversity or whatever the reason might be. But he's also a guy, I think he gives you a lot on the field. I understand he's like rated as number 10, number 11 among safeties, but when you start looking at his overall range, at least at 1 or 2 of the recruiting service, he might be a little underrated. I think that highly of him. ACC Tournament might knock us out of hosting. No pitching to go far. Kanak goes against NC State, who goes Wednesday. Allen, McGovern, Dvorsky. I don't know that losing Wednesday is going to knock them out of hosting, man. Just the way some of these other things have played out. They got like they don't have the most quad 1, quad 2 wins combined, but they're right up there at the top. It's like top 7, top 8, something like that in the country. Their RPI is 10th. Their strength of schedule is really good. I mean, I don't know that losing Wednesday will knock them out. I'm of the opinion that it won't. 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have thought that. I've kind of changed my thinking on that, especially, because 2 weeks ago, you're not long coming off that sweep in Raleigh. North Carolina State just dominated you, and it looked like North Carolina State was going to be in line for a host spot, but they've kind of just tanked down the stretch. They're all the way down to hold on a minute, and I'll tell you the exact number. They're all the way down to 34th in the RPI. They dropped 9 spots over the weekend. I think they're going to have a deep run to maybe even win it to be back in consideration to host. And I think that's helped Clemson because I think the ACC is going to get 4. And if you give the ACC 4, I don't know how you can leave Clemson out no matter what happens Wednesday. But now, as far as the pitching stuff, I'm kind of with you. I think I would, I wouldn't mind McGovern. I'd probably roll with Bailey on Wednesday and save Kanak for Thursday. Keeps him right on his, since he pitched last Thursday, keeps him right on his 7-day rest, and he'll probably pitch next Thursday when the regionals open. That'll probably be what day they're playing. But even if not, it'll be an extra day of rest because they wouldn't start till Friday. But that would probably be the way that I would do it. But I wouldn't be shocked if they went the other way and decided to roll Kanak out there and try to get one win. But I'm kind of with you. I don't think they got the pitching to go down there or go up there and win, 5 days in a row, because you'd have to win one Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to win it. And right now they got about 4 guys they can run out there as starters. And that's counting a Talon Bell or a Jacob McGovern or a BJ Bailey. And if you have to use one of those guys to start, then you can't use them out of the pen. So the injuries have just kind of caught up to them to a certain degree. Like we talked about it in the past, man, and it kind of worked out this way over the weekend. It's got to go extremely right from a pitching perspective for Clemson right now on the weekend. You need Kanak to go deep on Friday so you don't have to burn a bunch of guys in the first game, and that's kind of what happened. He pitches into the 8th. Would have, part of me sitting there thinking, man, you got to give him a shot to finish off the no-hitter, and part of me thinking, yeah, you got to make the switch because he's running out of gas. But you didn't have to burn, hardly anybody Friday. I didn't get to watch Saturday. I had something I had to do Saturday, so I didn't get to watch Saturday. But it ended up working out for them because Talon Bell gives you 4 yesterday, and a couple of those guys, struggle with command out of the pen once you get down, to the back end there with Allen and Dvorsky. Allen's really good 1 minute, then he's walking back-to-back guys the next. But anyway, I'm getting off topic there, but yeah, I'm kind of anxious to see what they do on Wednesday. If it was me, I probably would roll the dice and roll Bailey out there, or maybe even McGovern, man, because he's been really good since he came back from the injury. The only thing to me, the only difference there really is you trust Bailey or I do anyways. I trust Bailey more to get through the lineup twice than I do McGovern. Not because he doesn't have good stuff, but he's not. He doesn't. We all know he doesn't throw it very hard and all that stuff. I mean, he's just one of those guys that can that once a team has seen him one time through the order, he's a little bit easier to catch up to the second time through. But yeah, that's right. I'm looking now. I forgot they only used 2 pitchers Saturday too, Titsworth and McGovern, because Titsworth actually gave you a quality start for the first time since his first start. seemed like the national media is really hyping up Clemson. Is the hype justified? I think it is. There's a reason they're doing that, because they've got more experience production returning, I think, than anybody in the country. They've got one of the better quarterbacks returning. Obviously you'd like to see Klubnik kind of take that one final step as a senior, but man, he was really good for the most part down the stretch last year. What he did to Texas in the playoff, nobody else did. No other quarterback torched him the way he did. You've got 4 or 5 starters returning on the offensive line. You've got a really good core or a crop of receivers. You could probably go 5, 6 deep there. There ain't no doubt you can go 5. You can probably go 6. You got a couple of good tight ends. Really, the biggest question is running back. And I'm telling you, I've heard a lot of good things about Adam Randall all spring long after the spring ended. You're hearing all the right things about Gideon Davidson. Really, the questions kind of reside on the other side of the ball, and mostly because of what we saw last year. You push Goodwin out and bring Allen in, and to me that should fix a lot of the issues we saw last year. You got a lot of talent up front on that defensive line. I think you got enough talent up there. If you can stay healthy, to me, that's going to be one of the keys. You gotta keep Parker and healthy, because if you lose one of those guys, then you're in the same position you were last year. Assuming Darian Mayo is going to need another year to kind of get to where he needs to be an every down guy. But I think you got a lot of depth on the interior. I think you got more depth at linebacker than you've had in, I don't know, a long time. And, you got to replace R.J. Mickens on the back end, but there's a lot of options back there. I like what they've got at corner. I like some of the talent they've got at safety. There's a lot to like about this team, man. This is what I was fixing to say right here. I think when you're going into the season and punter is probably your biggest question, you're sitting in a pretty good spot. Baseball got a morale, but they got a boost in every sense of the word. They look more like what they were in the first half of the season. I'll use the term Backus likes to use a lot. They played complimentary baseball. Like yesterday, when Pitt tried to, kind of cut into that lead a little bit and scored a couple runs on the relievers, Allen and whoever else it was, Dvorsky, maybe, I can't remember who all it was, but they even scored one on Ballstead there at the end. But it seemed like every time Pitt would score a run or two, the offense would kind of push the lead right back out. And that's something they've not been able to do. They've gotten big leads. They got a big lead. They got a big lead against Duke in one of those games. Then they got an early lead in another one of those games against Duke, maybe not quite as big. But the pitching would give them up, and then the offense could never respond. They didn't really do anything the rest of the way. So I think that's a good sign. Again, Crichton's tearing the cover off the ball, man. He's had some streaks, but I don't know that he's had one quite like this. He was flat out good over the weekend. Again, I think he got screwed in the player of the week voting. Let's see, I got his numbers from the weekend right here. He was 9 of 13 with 3 doubles, a triple, 5 runs scored, 2 stolen bases. He's raised his average up to 302 now. Canarella, he had 4 hits on Thursday, 1 hit on Friday, 3 more on Saturday. He had 9 hits. Over the past 2 weekends, he's 14 of 25. He's back up to over 330. Clemson hitters had 45 hits in the sweep, hit over 340 as a team. On Saturday, they had 17 hits alone. They were 9 of 28 with runners on base, 6 of 19 with runners in scoring position. Leadoff hitter reached in each of the first 5 innings. That's getting it done. Matter of fact, I gotta kind of. I was gonna wait to the baseball show to do this, but I've probably been ragging on Colin Priest probably a little bit more than he's deserved. You know, he's hitting 253 for the season. He's got 11 homers, 11 doubles, 48 RBIs. But since the beginning of ACC play, he's hitting 276, 33 RBIs. He's slugging at 602, and his own pace is 439. That's not too bad. I was when I saw those numbers, I kind of had to do a double take, but yeah, I think they did what they needed to do. I mean, again, you're playing one of the bottom feeders of the league this year who actually had come in playing pretty well, and you just whipped their tail in all facets. It's kind of exactly what the doctor ordered, man. They really needed a series like that going into Durham. And then no matter what, even if you go out and lose Wednesday, man, you're still feeling good going into regional play. Will Dabo let Cade pat his? No. He's never done that before. He's not going to do it. If let's say that you win that first game against LSU, and then in week 2, when you are playing Troy, let's say you're up 35-10 in the fourth quarter, and there's 8 minutes to go in there, or let's say 5 minutes to go in the game, and you still got Klubnik in there, and he takes a blindside hit and breaks his leg. Dabo Swinney would never hear the end of that, man. He would get killed, and rightfully so. He's just always going to be a team first guy, and I just believe he's going to always put the goals of the team ahead of the individual, and if the individual accolades come by going that route, then so be it. But I don't think he'll ever, sacrifice a kid's or put a kid's health at risk just to pad his stats. Like we saw that with Lamar Jackson the year he won the Heisman. Some coaches do it, some don't. But I think this team's got bigger goals than somebody winning the Heisman this year. If you're in a position that Louisville was in, in 2016, where they're not really playing for anything, and even in the beginning of the season, you're probably not considering yourself a national title contender. And, I can kind of understand the thought process behind it, although I'm never a big fan of keeping a quarterback in there during trash time, trying to pad his stats just to make him look better for an individual award. Because I think you're putting his health at risk, and I don't think that's ever a good thing. Purify had a good weekend and looks to be coming back into form. He was definitely better than what he was the weekend before. In that Duke series, I don't think he had a hit in the Duke series, if I'm remembering right. Trying to remember exactly what he did over the weekend. He wasn't one of those guys that was just killing it. Let's see. I got it right here. He had one hit in the first game. He was 1 for 5. He had a pretty good day that day. Yeah, he was 2 for 5. Excuse me. Yeah, 2 for 5. And then he was 1 for 5 and 0 for 3. So, yeah, he had 3 hits over the weekend. He's still down at 288 right now. Came into the weekend at 296. So his average dropped a little bit over the weekend. But he definitely had a better weekend than he had last weekend when he didn't have any hits. Yeah, I'm not. I don't have any idea what the new gymnastics coach is doing from a recruiting standpoint. I might take your word for that one. Now, Kendall, I would definitely, at the bare minimum, I would give them I'd give the softball team a puncher's chance to go to Austin and win. That team's rolling, man. There's just something about the way they've played over the last month, 5 weeks, or whatever it is. It's probably since about the time they beat South Carolina at home, and they went on the road and beat Tennessee, I think right after that or either right before. Something about right in that area, man. Something just really started clicking for these guys. And, they've got more pitching depth. I think they've got more pitching depth than any of those other teams, in the past few years had. Used to be you kind of had to put it all on Cagle's shoulders. It's not that way this year. Some of those freshmen have really stepped up, but I don't watch a ton of softball. I can't even really speak on Texas, but again, at the very least, I would give them a puncher's chance, man. I wouldn't never count them completely out, man. There's just it just seems like there's kind of something magical brewing there, man, and it would kind of be the storybook ending to see those girls finally make it to Oklahoma City this year. Just the way the season started, and even before the season, a lot of people thinking it was going to be a rebuilding year, myself included. And then it starts. You win. You go 2-6 out of the gate, and then you got even more people thinking it's going to be a rebuilding year, man. But something has really clicked with those girls, man, and they got it rolling right now. So one defensive tackle recruit they offered checks in at 260 pounds. There's a move towards going smaller and faster and build. I don't know, man. Not that I'm aware of. I'd have to know who you're talking about specifically. I'm trying to find the guy you're talking about here. If you're talking about Bryce Perry Wright, he's kind of one of those guys that can play he can play inside or outside for you. You land him, you can play him at end for a year. But he's also a guy that can hold, that he's got the frame to hold more weight too. There's a lot of guys that when they're juniors in high schools, they only weigh 265, 270, 275, something like that. But they have the frames to kind of, they're going to continue to grow, and they have the frame to hold more weight. Like a Deuce Gerald's. That guy's probably going to play defensive tackle, man, but he's 6'2", and he's listed at 265 right now. I haven't heard anything about there being a concerted effort to get smaller and faster and build them up to 300 pounds. I mean, I think each guy's different. Each guy has their own story, and it just depends on the circumstances surrounding that guy. Oh, what happened? I used to work for Zach. I don't work for Zach anymore, so that's why. Concerned about 3-star defensive end at 230 pounds. Not because of his weight, no. Feels like that recruiting has gone downhill since Lemansky Hall. I feel like it started going downhill before that. And I don't think the development was where it needed to be, over the back half of his tenure either. But again, it's the same. It's kind of the same thing I was just talking about when we're talking about that's the kid's weight, as a junior in high school. Hadn't even started his senior season yet. He's probably going to be 6'3", 6'4" by the time he gets here. And you probably would rather focus on length more so than height, anyways. And he's probably got a lot more length. But there's a lot of guys there's a lot of defensive ends that are only around 230, 240 as juniors in high school. I mean, a ton of them. Let's see here. The highest rated end Clemson offered, Anthony Jones. He's 6'3", 240. Jake Krull, the guy who recently left Clemson off his list of finalists, 6'3", 230. Jordan Carter, 6'4", 235. I mean, Kamari Brooks, who they went after pretty hard, 6'4", 220. Trey Quinn, the other, he's a 4-star, depending on what service you look at. The other end that's gonna visit that for the big official visit weekend, 6'4", 228. The kid that Alabama just picked up, well, he's a little bit bigger, but Cam Brooks, the kid that committed to Cal, he's listed at 225. I mean that's not really all that uncommon at this point in their development, seeing as they're only juniors in high school. Yeah, yeah. Dabo gets on fire and says, "Is this Marco?" I'm sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, he's called this kid by the wrong name. He ain't never gonna hear the end of it." And then I don't think he thought he was heard the first time he said it, so he said it again, and then it kind of dawned on me what he was doing. Yeah, it ended up being hilarious. Think Georgia Tech has a better chance to host over NC State? 100%. Yeah, I think the ACC is probably looking at four teams to host. I don't see how there's any way North Carolina State's going to host. They're just too far down into RPI. Again, they're all the way down at 34. I lost them. There it is. They've got 5 losses against quad 3 teams, 2 losses against quad 4 teams. That's not really a hosting resume. When you compare it to Clemson, who's 18-0 against quad 3 and quad 4, or you compare it to, if I can find Georgia Tech here, Georgia Tech, who's 18-2 in quad 4. They are 6-3 in quad 3, but their RPI is up at number 20. Now, there's a big difference between 20 and 34. North Carolina's at number 7. Florida State is down at 14. But even if you only get 3 ACC hosts, I still think Clemson's one of them. I don't know how you can let Georgia Tech, even though they won the regular season, they were one game better. Clemson, I know they finished 5th, but they were one game behind the first place team. That really starts making you pull your hair out again when you start thinking about that one they gave away to Florida State in the series opener. and down there in Tallahassee. But yeah, I kind of lean towards thinking the ACC is going to get 4 hosts, and Georgia Tech will be the 4th and final one. Clemson will be the 3rd, and even if they only get 3, Clemson, I still think Clemson's going to be. Again, you're talking about they're 41-15. They got 18 ACC wins. Those are kind of, that 40 win mark's kind of one of the benchmarks. 18 conference wins, one of the benchmarks. They are one game. Clemson is one game under 500 against quad 1 teams. They're 8-9 there, but they're 15-6 against quad 2, and a combined 18-0 against quad 3 and quad 4. But yeah, I think North Carolina State's kind of ruined their shot. They probably need to win it all this weekend or this week. I think Clemson is going to have to keep finding underrated, high-potential defensive ends like Mayo, because that position is another one that turns into – yep, they often do turn into bidding wars for sure. It's one of those glamour spots that kind of commands a high price tag. But I mean, I think Mayo is like a top 150 guy or something like that coming out of high school. But yeah, your point is valid. That's why I made sure to mention earlier that you can always go to the portal and grab another one, although it's still pretty difficult. But again, that's kind of why I like to see them have, expanded the pool a little bit. Give yourself a couple more options instead of having to try to get in on a loot waffle late. You went after the kid at IMG who you really never really had a shot with. Hadn't really even recruited anybody from IMG since the 2022 class. I don't know. I just think there's a lot of different reasons or valid reasons for kind of making that pool of players or targeting a little bit bigger. And the margin for error is still pretty slim, but it's not nearly as slim when you're only going after, or there's 3-4 you're going after, and you really only have a realistic shot with 2 of them. That the misses when you miss, and you're targeting that few players, when you miss, you feel it even more. I would kind of, Backus just said that if he wasn't back for Pitt, he'd be back for scratch that. I don't know. Actually, what Backus said was they hope to get him back for the ACC tournament. If not, he'd be back for regional. So I'm going to lean towards thinking Darden's not going to be available. The hope would be you at least have Reed Garris back, because that is a big blow not having him, particularly when you got to play as many as 5 games in 5 days. He's a guy you need. They need him back. Absolutely should have let him go for the no-hitter. I'd have been mad if I was Kanak. I think they did let him go for the no-hitter. Like I said, I was a little torn because I always lean towards letting guys go out and try and finish, but that's what they did in the 8th. And he started walking guys. I think he walked 2 and hit another one. They had already scored 1 run. It was pretty obvious to me that he was out of gas. He was well up over his season high in pitches. I don't think, knowing Kanak, he was not mad at all. Talking about the ultimate team first guy, that's him. But in theory, I'm always for letting the guy try to finish it off. But I also think they did try to let him finish it off, and it was obvious that he was already running out of gas, and that Pitt was on the verge of kind of putting some runs on the board there, because he had littered the bases with a couple of walks and a hit batter, and they ended up scoring a run without the benefit of a hit. then you bring Joe Allen, and I think he walked the first guy he faced too and loaded the bases, but then he got the next two. So I mean, I kind of understand the move. I opinions will vary on that. It'll just depend on how you feel. Like I know I was talking to a guy during the game Thursday night. He was livid that Bakich was taking Kanak out with a no-hitter. See, I was a little torn on it. I will admit that, but I totally understood it. You know, he had walked 2 all game, and then he walked 2 in that inning, and I think he hit a guy. So you don't want to give them any momentum. That is a game you absolutely 100% have to win. You don't want to give them any momentum and let them get back in it. Setting aside special teams punting, the Tigers might have complementary football between offense and defense like we haven't seen in 5 years. That would be the hope, 100%, man. It's been a while. You know, for a few years there, the offense couldn't do squat and the defense was kind of carrying everything. And then last year, that script got flipped. The defense is like Swiss cheese and the offense is having to carry the defense. I'm with you. I think you're going to start seeing a lot more complimentary football this year. I think the defense is going to be much improved because there was never a question of talent on that side of the ball last year. Everybody's got their theory on why things didn't work out. I got my own, and I don't hear any of them centering around lack of talent. You know, I think going out and getting Tom Allen was a home run hire. And, you know, I think that defense, I think it's going to pay. Sometimes it takes a year, more than a year for a coaching hire to really make an impact. I don't think that's going to be the case here. How much play time do I think Shefflin? I don't know, man. That's a good question. It's going to be a lot to learn in a short amount of time. Hasn't played football since he was in the 9th grade or something like that. So it's been a while since he's played football. He's joining a tight end room that's already pretty crowded. You got Olsen, Pat Henry kind of firmly entrenched there as the starter. And I think you got an up-and-coming superstar in Betancourt, and kind of got Josh Sapp, who's kind of is what he is at this point. But and then you got the Brooking kid, who by all accounts had a fantastic spring. A lot of that's probably going to depend on him, how much you see him. I would probably lean towards thinking not a lot. Stranger things have certainly happened. You know, again, a lot of that's going to be up to him and how quickly he picks some things up. You know, and some of that will depend on how they decide to utilize him. Are they going to see him as a guy they can lean more on from a blocking aspect, or do they want him to go out and run routes? I mean, he 6'8", 240 pounds. He could be a great red zone target. Probably got pretty good hands too. It's going to be an interesting storyline, but I mean, I don't think he's going to be a guy that comes in and plays a bunch of snaps. I think you might see him situationally, but again, some of that's going to depend on him and how they see him fitting into things. Will I be? Yep, I will be at every camp session. I sure will. Come find me. Do I think Allen's preferred schemes will play to the strength of this season's defense, meaning front and linebacker? Yeah, I do. I think, again, like I said earlier, I think you got more depth at linebacker this year than you've had it going back to probably the early Venable days, or at least the mid part of the Venables era. For so long now, we've seen them have to rely on just two linebackers, or when they were using a Sam, two linebackers and a Sam, and it's usually those two or either those three guys getting pretty much all the snaps. I don't think it's going to have to be that way this year. I think you'll be able to rotate in a guy like Alexander, maybe D. Creighton, depending on, where he is coming off the injury. Helps keep those guys fresh. But, man, again, if you can stay healthy at end, and I think the sky's the limit for this defense, man. I think there's a ton of talent up front along the defensive line, or at least on the interior of the defensive line. I should say a ton at end. I do think there's some young pieces that will be good. Just don't know that they'll be ready this year. But you got to stay healthy at end. There's a lot to like on the interior, man. We always talk about DeMonte Capehart and Peter Woods, but you still got guys like Vic Burley, Stephon Green, Champ Thompson got a lot of love, during his first, I can't remember if it was his first spring or his first fall camp. I think Evan Brown Schuler's got a guy with a lot of potential. And then you got the new guy, Amari Adams, who's a former 5-star. I mean, there's a lot of bodies you can rotate to keep guys fresh on the interior. I think you can keep 5 guys fresh at linebacker now more so than you could in the past. Yeah, I like the way this thing stacks up. Why didn't Clemson softball get the last regional hosted when the 10-1 regional hosted lost? They gave it to Oregon 16 and Clemson. I think you're asking me why they didn't host a super regional. They were matched up against Texas. They were in the bracket opposite Texas, who was the 6th overall seed. Like you say, Clemson's the 11th seed. The only way they would be able to host a super regional was if Texas would have lost in the regional round over the weekend. They didn't, so Clemson has to go to Austin. Priest earned third-team conference honor. Yeah, he sure did. I didn't either, man. I'm telling you, he's a guy I've kind of ragged on a lot of the year, but once you start digging into the numbers, he's been a little bit better than I've given him credit for since the ACC play began. 100%. Granted, he does strike out a lot. He 48 strikeouts this year. Only Gerald, Pano, and Purify have more. And Chufo. So there's a few guys that's got more strikeouts than him. Yeah, he's got 48. They got 1, 2, 3 guys over 50. Yeah. But yeah, he definitely performed better down the stretch. Sure, he found his power stroke at least, which is something they could use because they just hadn't hit for power much this year. Here's another good point. You don't need to pad stats with Cade. If you're to the point of padding stats, you need to be getting Vizina reps. I would wholeheartedly jump on board with that. The aggressive base running is something that really sparked the offense. What we saw this weekend, that's kind of what I envisioned coming into the season. And for whatever reason, they've just not been that aggressive on the bases. I think they stole 11 bases in the sweep. Got thrown out once. Crichton had a couple. Purify is he's 25 of 29 on the season. But other than that, nobody else has double digit in steals. Pano's got 9. He's 9 of 10. Even Listy, who's got pretty good speed, he's only he's only stole 9. That was something that I thought they would really take advantage of, was some of the speed in the lineup, even coming into the season. And then once we got a little bit into it, and you start to realize, hey, this team's probably not going to hit as many home runs as we thought it would, at least then, but for whatever reason, they haven't been as aggressive. But man, they were this weekend. And, I'm all for aggressiveness on the base paths. I love that. How would you assess Garrett Riley's performance so far? About what I expected. I think everybody, when you make that kind of hire, everybody expects it to everything to click year one. And like I was saying earlier, sometimes you don't really start seeing the impact of a hire until year 2 or so. I think that was kind of the case here. It just, you had a quarterback that was going through some growing pains in his first year as the full-time starter. You had some inconsistencies up front. Not the strongest of receiving corps. There was just a lot of things that first year that really made it look discombobulated, and it really started with Klubnik. A lot of his inconsistencies, ball security stuff, but I think you started to see what it could be last year. I definitely don't think they've hit the peak yet. I think there's still another step they can take, but the trajectory is definitely heading. It's definitely pointing in the right direction. Is Eason or Rump even going to land an elite defensive lineman, or at least a good 4-star? Got too many people that just rely too heavily on the stars to dictate whether a guy's ever going to be any good. I can't get on board with that thinking, man. I am a huge fan of Cam Cody, the defensive tackle already committed in the class. I don't care that he's only got 3 stars. There is a lot to like about that kid. I would probably consider Clemson the leader for Bryce Perry Wright at this point. One of the better defensive linemen in the class. He can play end or he can play tackle. He's actually a 5-star, in at least one of the services. I do think, end's kind of been concerning. Don't know how much of that you can put on Chris Rumpf. I think a lot of that's got to do with just the era we're in right now, and defensive end being a position that commands a pretty big price tag, or at least the higher end defensive ends. And you're not ever going to see a freshman come in and make more money than an older guy on the roster at Clemson. That's just not the way it's set up. Just not the way Dabo operates. He believes in guys having to come in and earn it. And it's probably hurt him with some defensive ends. That's why you saw him hit the portal for one last year. They could do the same thing, or over the offseason, they can do the same thing again next year. But we still a long ways to go. And between now and signing day, you land a guy like Drake Quinn, and you're probably pretty good. We'll see. I think they probably leave for Hardrick, but if you're judging a guy based on how many stars he's got, I think you're starting out all wrong. Was I surprised? No, not at all. I was not surprised that he did not get drafted. Yeah, I think film don't lie. Eason and Rumpf dropping the ball in this class. No elite tackle. See, again, I will agree to disagree because you make your findings based on stars and nothing else. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume you've not even watched the film of the defensive tackle that's committed. And when you all you do is base it off stars, that's a flawed process from the jump. It's politics are involved as much as anything. You look at if a kid doesn't work out at this camp or that camp, he's going to get dinged or he's going to get propped up. It's just a whole lot of different things that go into it. But I don't know that you can claim that Eason's dropping the ball at all. I mean, we're not even to the summer yet, man, and we're already starting to throw coaches under the bus because kids aren't committed. Most of these defensive linemen, they're going to take their official visits before they make any decisions. Clemson is loaded at defensive tackle right now. They're not going to take 3 or 4 guys in this class. They're going to take 1 or maybe 2. So knowing what they've already got on the roster, they are going to be extremely selective in who they go after. The Perry Wright kid's been the top target at the defensive tackle position all along. Uncommitted. I don't think you can hold that against Easton because the guy's not ready to commit yet. Now, I do think you got some issues there at end, but I don't think they're Chris Rumpf problems. You know, again, end's one of those positions that's going to hurt you when you can't offer or when you're not going to offer what some other programs might offer some of these higher end guys. Like I said a minute ago, you're not going to see Dabo paying some 4 or 5-star freshman to come in and make more than a guy like TJ Parker. That's kind of what's going on there. You know, I do wish they would have kind of widened the net a little bit and had a bigger pool of candidates that they were chasing. But that's not a Chris Rumpf thing. That's a Dabo thing. He makes the calls on who gets offers and who don't. But again, even if you don't hit on who you want, you can always go to the portal. And now that you've seen him do it, now you know he will. Mayo was only top 20 or top 25. Yeah, maybe. But if you're top 150 overall, man, that's pretty good in my book. And I think he was rated as a defensive lineman, not a defensive end, if I'm remembering right. Let me pull it up. I can pull it up right here. No, 24/7 had him as an edge, so I stand corrected there. But he was 148 overall. To me, that's pretty solid. And if you look at, he's rated at, it says he's a edge, but if you look what he's rated as a defensive lineman. So he's thrown in there with all the tackles and all the edge rushers that don't really have that they haven't specified a position for, which makes it a little bit harder. But I mean, I see what you're saying. You know, to me, I kind of, if you're 148 overall, man, I don't know. To me, that's pretty strong. Do you think Clemson can turn the corner and get back on track and stay on track in postseason? So many years past, they fall apart late in the season. If we're talking about baseball, you know, I've seen several people say this lately, and I don't know where it's coming from. Eric Bakic's first year, man, Clemson went into regional play rolling, man. They had won a bunch of games in a row. They didn't falter late in the season. Same thing last year. Both years they earned a top 8 seed. In Bakic's first year, he took them to a top 8 seed after they hadn't even made the postseason 2 years in a row. He did it again in his second year, took them to their first super regional since 2010. They've hit a little bit of a skid going down the stretch this year, but that's the first time in the Bakic era. If we're calling them losing 2 out of 3 to Florida in a super regional falling apart, then we're going to agree to disagree there. But let me add this. I think what they've done over the second half of the season, if you go, I don't know if you were here last week. I can't remember. I went through all the guys, all the arms they have injured. And the fact that we were talking about this team maybe hosting a regional, that's an accomplishment, man, when you start talking about some of the pitchers they lost. And while I think they had a little bit more pitching depth this year, they certainly didn't have enough to overcome all that. And we've kind of seen it over the last 3 weeks. And it'll probably be what ends up being their downfall in the postseason. But, due to those injuries, no, I don't know that this team's got what they need to make a run to Omaha, if that's what we're talking about. I just don't think they've got the arms. I'm not sure they've got the arms to get through a regional. They best, if they're going to get to a super regional, they best stay out of the losers bracket. If it goes right for them, they can certainly do it. But they have to get a couple bounces go their way, and they have to not have to start relying on the bottom half of that bullpen in multiple games. But it's his third year, man. I don't think he's. You go to a regional year 1, you go to a super in year 2. Obviously, the next logical steps, Omaha year 3. I've said that many times myself. But is the season a failure if they don't make it to Omaha? I don't think so. Particularly when you start considering all the things that happened injury-wise. They've had some guys that did not hit the ball the way they were anticipating they would. Several of them, the offense just hasn't clicked the way I think most thought it would. But, yeah, I just don't know that I'd say that the baseball team falls apart late in the season. I think this is the first time we've seen anything remotely like this since Bakic has been hired. Seen a couple people say Contavious Anderson might be another Isaiah Simmons. Yeah, he's got some versatility. That's pretty high praise when you start comparing him to Isaiah. I kind of, y'all know me, I don't really like to do player comps, but I think there's some different ways he can be used, man. I think there's a couple of different spots he could play. He can certainly fly. We all know he can run. Anybody that follows recruiting probably knows that this guy can motor. Again, he's got the length, he's got the athleticism, and he's got the speed, and he doesn't shy away from the physical part. He's I think he, along with the Gephardt kid, man, give you 2 fantastic safeties. And it's time to start giving Mickey Kahn his flowers, man, for all these people that just crapped all over him for so many years. Not only is that guy developing the great players he gets, he's getting it done on the trail too. My thoughts on Cam not trying to – he stole some bases over the weekend. He's got 6 now, but, it's kind of the same thing with the rest of them. I thought they were going to be more aggressive on the base pass than they have been. They just they just haven't done it a lot outside of when Purify gets on base. You know, it's not just Cam. I don't think it's just. I don't think we're just talking about Cam here. We finally saw him cut them loose over the weekend. Crichton had a couple, Cam had a couple, Purify had a couple. I think there was somebody else that had more than one. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but you know, for the season, they've stolen 73 bases and they've only been thrown out 14 times. They are 73 of 87. That's pretty dang good. If it were me, I would cut them loose a little bit more, Cam included. Oh, yeah. Going back to that last thing, yeah, they not only did they finish the regular season on that long winning streak, they also ran through the ACC tournament undefeated, won that. Yeah, if they can get out of regional play, I absolutely think they got a shot to make it. You know, I think they can compete with most anybody 2 out of 3. To me, it's the biggest thing is going to be staying out of that losers bracket in regional play. If they drop a game in the regional, it's going to be hard to come back from that because I just don't know that they got the pitching to do it. Project the starting lineup for Brownell in game 1. Hold on a minute, man. He's got so many new faces. I don't want to forget somebody. You can definitely pencil in Dylan Hunter and Nick Davidson. All right, Dylan Hunter, Johnson, and Porter. Probably your 3 guards with Nick Davidson and Carter Wellen as that's probably your starting 5, first 5 to run out there. And you got guys like Zach Foster and RJ Godfrey that you can rotate in. Jake Whalen. Yeah. And then some of that might depend on who you open up with. If you want to go with more size, take one of those guards out and put Godfrey in. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can go with that lineup, man. They can do some mixing and matching. Does Clemson have a legitimate shot at Atkinson? I actually touched base with him today, asked him if he had locked in his official visit to Clemson yet, and he said no. I fully expect him to be there. You know, when you asking me, do they have a legitimate shot? You know, they're in it. That's where you want to be at this point. You know, we'll see what happens after that. He's probably going to be a hard pull out of that state. You know, he's a guy that Georgia has been on hard for a long time. Clemson kind of fell out of favor with him with the way the defense performed last year and the things happening with Wes Goodwin. You know, Boulware makes it a priority to get Clemson back in. I mean, it's a heck of an accomplishment that he's done that in his first year as an assistant. But you know, whether they went out on him, that's going to be hard to that's hard to say at this point, man. I think the best thing you can do is hope that you're in it and that you got a realistic shot. And I think that's where we are at this point. I think they're in it. Again, even though he told me he doesn't have the visit officially locked in, I would be shocked if he's not there. He hadn't really talked much about official visits and dates yet. But you get him there that weekend, you take your shot and see what happens. Where does Clemson stand with Samari Matthews? Probably they might be third right now. They're definitely trending in the wrong direction and have been for quite some time. South Carolina was trending for a while. Florida State was trending for a while. Texas started gaining some traction. This is just looking like one of those ones that's going to go in a different direction. Well, I'll be dog. You've already got two corners. I wanted to make sure I had that right. You already got two corners locked up in this class. He would be a good third one to get. I just don't think it's going to play out that way. Tigers better score runs, stay aggressive because killer pitching is not close to what they need. No, the pitching that's what has me concerned about them getting out of a regional. But the offense hasn't quite, before this weekend, the offense wasn't anything to write home about either. They definitely needed to stay clicking at the plate. That's for sure. I think they need to kind of stay at least similar to the way they were on the bases over the weekend, at least be somewhat aggressive. You don't have to go like all out. But yeah, you got to create some opportunities for yourself, man. This team's going to have to score some runs, particularly if they, end up dropping a game in a regional and end up having to go through the loser's bracket. Because I think that's a recipe for disaster, the way the pitching injuries have played out, especially if you don't have a guy like Reed Garris back by then. I mean, he's been such a big part of things, but I would probably assume on him being back by then, but certainly couldn't say it's definitive by any stretch. Mr. Negative says we won't be the first 17-0 national championship team. It will be Georgia. Well, I mean, I haven't seen anybody claiming that Clemson was going to be the first 17-0 national championship team, but all righty. I know I certainly haven't picked them to run the table, but okay. We got Justin's prediction. They will not go undefeated. I mean, if you're saying Georgia will, I don't think they will either, but I think it's going to be extremely hard for teams to go undefeated over 17 games. Extremely hard. Want to thank our sponsors again, A-Glass. 2 locations right here in the PD, one in Florence, one in Sumter. They'll take care of all your auto glass needs. Give them a call today. The number in Sumter is 803-607-9130. Appreciate everybody that tuned in tonight. If you have not done so already and you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Check us out. Clemson Insider, we're going to have softball coverage all week, baseball coverage all week. Got some more recruiting stuff to come. I still got some stuff coming from the Anderson commitment on Friday. So be on the lookout for that. Ashby and myself possibly here tomorrow night. Not 100% sure about that. If we don't do it tomorrow night, not sure if we're going to get it done this week. If not, we'll be back next week. Definitely let you know, on Twitter, or I'll put it out on Facebook or whatever. So be on the lookout for that. Appreciate everybody that tuned in tonight. Another good crowd in here. Always appreciate it. If I don't see you on the baseball show, right back here next Monday.